Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
This is one of those stories that sounds unreal when you first hear it. The kind people instinctively doubt because it sits at the intersection of government secrecy, human tragedy, and complete lack of transparency. I understand why people question it. If I hadn't been close to someone directly involved, I might question it too. But I was there the day the phone call came in, and I watched the reaction unfold in real time. Whatever the full truth is, something deeply wrong happened. The woman at the center of it worked in a federal government laboratory in Canada. Her work was not public-facing. She was employed by Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and the nature of her job placed her inside a highly restricted, classified environment. The kind of workplace where access is controlled, records are meticulous, and breaches of protocol are treated as serious offenses. One day, while at work, she became violently ill. This wasn't a gradual thing. It was sudden enough and severe enough that military medical personnel were involved in transporting her to a hospital. Even that detail alone stands out. This wasn't a normal ambulance ride. From the beginning, the situation was treated as something extraordinary. At the hospital, while doctors tried to stabilize her, she made a statement that immediately complicated everything. She told medical staff that she had taken something with the intention of killing herself. She said it wasn't working as quickly as she had expected. She also admitted that whatever she had taken came from the top-secret laboratory where she worked. Then she refused to say anything more. She would not tell doctors what the substance was. She would not give a name, a description, or even a category. She did not provide information that would allow doctors to counteract it or even understand what they were dealing with. CSIS personnel were already present at the hospital. They had accompanied her there, reportedly because of the classified nature of her work. When doctors pressed for information, hoping to access lab records or at least be told what kind of compound she might have ingested, they were refused. The explanation given was national security. CSIS staff acknowledged that laboratory records would almost certainly show exactly what substance she had access to and what she may have taken. They did not deny that this information existed. They simply stated that they could not disclose it. Not to the doctors, not to the hospital, not to anyone outside their organization. They refused to cooperate. The doctors were placed in an impossible position. They were being asked to save a patient's life while being denied critical information necessary to do so. They could not identify the toxin. They could not treat it effectively. They could only provide supportive care and watch her condition worsen. She was moved into isolation. Military guards were stationed outside her hospital room. The presence of armed personnel made it immediately clear that this was no longer being treated as a normal medical emergency. Access to her room was tightly controlled. Her parents were not allowed in. Her husband was not allowed in. No family members were permitted to see her. This part is difficult to grasp emotionally. Regardless of security concerns, this was a woman dying in a hospital bed. Her loved ones were physically nearby, and yet completely barred from saying goodbye. No explanation was given to them that satisfied even the most basic human need for understanding. She lingered for several hours. During that time, she never revealed what she had ingested. She did, however, say one thing that has stayed with me. She told staff that no one else would be harmed by what she had done. It was a strange reassurance, given the circumstances, but it suggested awareness and intent. She knew what she had taken. She knew what it would do. And she believed the damage would end with her. Eventually, she died. What happened next only deepened the unease surrounding the case. Her body was claimed by the government. There was no traditional release to family, no private funeral arrangements, on no viewing. She was reportedly cremated at an unknown government facility. Her ashes were never returned to her husband or her parents. As far as anyone involved has been able to learn, the family was never told what was done with her remains. They were simply gone. The husband, desperate and confused, began making calls. He contacted a colleague of mine, someone he had known socially through university connections. He was looking for legal help. He wanted to force the hospital or the government to allow him to see his wife before she died, or at least to understand what was happening. My colleague was not a lawyer with expertise in national security or emergency injunctions. He did what he could and referred the husband to someone more qualified. But by then, time was already slipping away. I remember the call. I remember my colleague's reaction after he hung up. He was visibly shaken. This was not someone prone to exaggeration or emotional displays. He was stunned, not only by the suicide attempt itself, but by who it involved. He said she was the most stable, law-abiding, ethical person he had ever known. This was someone who followed rules, someone who respected structure and protocol, someone who took responsibility seriously. According to him, she was not impulsive. She was not reckless. She was not the type of person who broke regulations casually, much less violated some of the strictest security protocols in the country. The idea that she would deliberately steal an unknown substance from a top-secret lab and ingest it seemed completely incompatible with the person he remembered from university. Yet he was struggling to reconcile that image with what he had just been told. That contradiction is one of the most disturbing aspects of the story. Either she changed in a way no one close to her noticed, or something else was happening that remains completely hidden. There has never been a public explanation. No official statement clarifying what substance was involved. No acknowledgement of whether the protocols failed or whether the system itself played a role in her death. To this day, the family has no answers. They do not know what she ingested. They do not know why secrecy overrode medical transparency. They do not know why they were denied access to her while she was dying. And they do not know what ultimately happened to her remains. If this were a fictional story, it would be criticized for being unrealistic, too opaque, for too cruel, too convenient in its unanswered questions. But it happened. And the most unsettling part is how quietly it happened. There was no public reckoning, no scandal, no accountability that anyone outside a small circle was ever aware of. The machinery of the state moved efficiently, sealing off information and minimizing exposure, while a family was left in the dark. The story lingers not because it proves anything extraordinary, but because it exposes how powerless individuals can become when secrecy takes priority over humanity. It raises uncomfortable questions about where ethical obligations end when national security is invoked, and who gets to decide when a life becomes secondary to information. I don't claim to know the full truth. I don't know what she took. I don't know why she did it. I don't know whether there were pressures or circumstances no one else saw. What I do know is that a woman died slowly in a hospital room, surrounded by guards instead of family, while doctors were prevented from doing their jobs, and her loved ones were denied even the most basic closure. And that knowledge has never sat right with me. Some stories don't frighten you with monsters or violence. They frighten you with silence, with closed doors, and with the realization that sometimes entire lives can disappear behind the words national security, leaving nothing behind but unanswered questions and grief that has nowhere to go.
When I was very young, somewhere between 6 and 8 years old, my family lived in a house that I can only describe as deeply unsettling, even before I understood why. It was a very old, two-story house, the kind with uneven floors, long shadows, and a constant sense that the walls had seen too much. Because it was so large, my stepdad had a few of his friends living there as roommates. As a kid, that alone made the place feel strange, like there were always too many adults, too many voices, and too many lives overlapping under one roof. My bedroom was at the top of the stairs on the left. It didn't even have a door, just a wide opening that led straight into the room. Across from me, my two brothers shared the opposite room. The stairwell itself had doors at both the top and the bottom, and every single night before bed, I made sure both were closed. No one told me to do this. It was just something I needed to feel even a tiny bit safer. I was already an anxious kid, and something about that stairwell made my skin crawl. At the time, I didn't know the full history of the house. No one told me. I only learned years later that the previous owner, our great-uncle Earl, had committed suicide there, in my bedroom. He had hung himself directly above the spot where I slept every night. When I finally found that out as an adult, it was like a missing puzzle piece snapping into place. Everything that terrified me as a child suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. But long before I knew any of that, the house made itself known. Every single night, starting around 10 or 11, we would hear footsteps, not random creaks, not the settling of an old house. These were heavy, deliberate footsteps, slow, measured, clear as day. They always started at the bottom of the stairs. You could hear them step by step climbing upward. Each footfall was distinct, like someone wearing boots or heavy shoes, taking their time. The worst part was that the door at the bottom of the stairwell never opened. It stayed shut. We would hear the footsteps climb anyway. They would reach the top of the stairs, turn, and walk straight into my room. Then, without pause, they would start again at the bottom, over and over. The same pattern every night until around 4 in the morning. Then they would stop. This wasn't something I imagined. My brothers heard it. My mom heard it. My stepdad heard it. We all lay awake in our beds listening to it, frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. There was no mistaking it for anything else. These were footsteps. Someone walking the stairs of our home while everyone was supposed to be asleep. Typing this out now, decades later, I can still feel that same bone-deep terror. The kind that punches you in the gut and makes your throat tighten. The kind that makes you want to cry even though you're not a child anymore. That fear never really leaves you. It just goes dormant. My youngest brother, who was much smaller at the time, would say things that made it even worse. He would tell us he saw people in the house at night. Not shadows, not shapes, people. He talked about them casually, like it was normal, which somehow made it more disturbing. We always thought he might have been extra sensitive to things most people can't perceive. Even now, thinking about what he might have been seeing makes my stomach turn. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe I was tired of being scared. Maybe I wanted proof that my fear was justified. Maybe some part of me wanted to confront whatever was haunting us. The footsteps were coming up the stairs, slow and steady as always. I got out of bed, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I walked to the top of the stairwell door, opened it, and turned on the light. There was nothing there, no person, no shadow, no movement. Just the empty stairwell, lit up and silent. The footsteps stopped instantly when the light came on. That silence was almost worse than the noise. I didn't stand there long enough to process it. I slammed the door, ran back into my room, and dove under my covers like a terrified animal. I lay there shaking, barely breathing, and then, as if nothing had happened, the footsteps started again at the bottom of the stairs. Step, step, step. Up they came. That moment cemented something in me that has never gone away. Whatever was happening wasn't in my head. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't imagination. It reacted to being seen, or at least to the light, and it wasn't happy about it. As time went on, my mom reached a breaking point. There were nights when the footsteps were louder, heavier, more insistent, like whoever or whatever it was replaying something over and over again. On those nights, my mom would shout up the stairs, "Go to bed, Earl." And as insane as it sounds, the footsteps would stop. Not always for the whole night, but long enough to let us breathe. Long enough to fall asleep. Long enough to feel like maybe, just maybe, we weren't completely powerless in our own home. No one ever told me to be afraid of Earl. No one ever explained who he was or what he had done. But somehow my mom knew. Or maybe she felt it too. Maybe the house told her in its own way. Whatever the reason, she addressed him directly, and something listened. We lived in that house for years. Years of sleepless nights, years of fear, years of whispered conversations between siblings, trying to convince ourselves we weren't crazy. Years of footsteps climbing the stairs to my room, night after night, like a ritual that could not be broken. Eventually, we moved out. Years later, the house was burned down in a controlled burn to make way for new suburban development. When I heard about it, I went back. I stood there looking at the rubble, the charred remains of the place that had haunted my childhood. I picked up a couple of scorched bricks and took them with me as mementos. I don't know why I did that. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was a way of acknowledging that what happened there was real, and that it shaped me. As a family, we all share this strange mix of fear and fascination with ghosts in the afterlife because of that house. You can't live through something like that and come out unchanged. You can't hear footsteps for years with no physical source and still believe the world is as simple as people say it is. I will always believe in ghosts now. Not because I want to, not because it's comforting, but because I lived with one, because I heard it, because it walked into my room every night while I lay there, a child, terrified and helpless, sleeping beneath the place where a man had ended his life. Some experiences don't fade with time. They embed themselves into who you are. That house did that to me. And even though it's gone now, burned to the ground and replaced by neat rows of suburban homes, what happened there still lives on, in me. And in the footsteps I can still hear if I let myself remember too clearly. When I woke up, I didn't understand where I was or why my body felt so wrong. The last clear memory I had was being out with friends after work. It was a normal night. I had 2 beers, nothing excessive, nothing that should have knocked me out. After that, there was nothing. Just a hard, empty gap, like time had been ripped out of my head. The next thing I remember is coming out of what felt like a coma. I was on my back, barely able to move, barely able to think. And there was a man over me, forcing himself into my mouth, trying to make my body respond. It took a few seconds for my brain to catch up with what was happening. Those seconds felt endless. Confusion hit first, then disbelief, then a sudden, violent clarity. I shoved him away and yelled, asking him what the hell he was doing. He smiled at me. Not nervous, not startled. Just smiling. He said, "You wanted this." That moment flipped something inside me. The shock burned off instantly and turned into pure rage. I had never felt anger like that before. I was 22, recently out of the army, 6'3", in the best shape of my life, and suddenly, every ounce of that strength came rushing back into my body. From a lying position, I curled up and threw the hardest uppercut I've ever landed in my life. I don't remember thinking about it. My body just reacted. He went down hard and didn't get back up. He was out cold. I stood there shaking, my heart pounding, my head buzzing, trying to process what had just happened. Then survival mode kicked in. I needed my clothes. I needed to get out. I walked around his room and then the apartment, looking for my things. That's when I heard the noise. Loud banging, shouting, someone screaming outside the front door. It sounded violent, frantic, like the door might come down. At that moment, I didn't care. I was so angry that the noise barely registered. They could break the door down for all I cared. I was still running on adrenaline and fury, and nothing felt more important than getting my stuff and leaving. My clothes, shoes, wallet, and cards were scattered all over the apartment. Not neatly placed, thrown around. That made me even angrier. It felt like another violation layered on top of everything else. I remember thinking that if he woke up, I would hit him again just for that. But he didn't wake up. I grabbed everything I could find, shoved it on, and finally went to the door. The banging and yelling were nonstop. When I opened it, I was face to face with a much smaller guy, maybe 5'3". He was screaming, completely hysterical, accusing me of sleeping with his boyfriend and locking the door. Before I could say anything, he jumped at me. He hit me, screaming, flailing, completely out of control. That's when everything went black. I don't remember deciding to react. I don't remember weighing options. My body took over again. I grabbed him, threw him into a wall, and hit him hard. Hard enough that he stopped attacking me. After that, everything is fragmented. The next clear memory I have is being in the back of a taxi, on my way home. The adrenaline was gone. The anger was gone. What was left was shock, exhaustion, and something heavy and hollow settling into my chest. I went home to my girlfriend, who I lived with at the time. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to put words to what had happened. I just remember sitting there and crying silently for a long time. Not loud sobbing, just tears falling while I stared at nothing, trying to make sense of how a normal night had turned into something so violent and violating. What stays with me isn't just the assault itself, but the disbelief, the way he smiled, the certainty in his voice when he said I wanted it, the casual cruelty of that lie, the way my body had been taken out of my control without my consent, without my awareness, without any warning. I had always thought I was strong. I had always believed I could protect myself. And in some ways, I did. But waking up drugged, helpless, and already being violated shattered something fundamental in how I understood safety and control. Even now, thinking back on it, parts of it feel unreal, like it happened to someone else. Like my memory skips over the worst moments because my mind still doesn't want to hold them fully. I survived it. I got out. I went home. But that night never really ended. It just became something I carry quietly. A reminder of how fast everything can change, how easily trust can be exploited, and how violence doesn't always look the way people expect it to. It's not something I talk about often, but it's something I remember. And it's something that shaped me in ways I didn't understand at the time, but still feel now. There was this story I heard years ago that has never really left my mind. It wasn't something that happened directly to me, but it was close enough, personal enough, that it lodged itself somewhere deep and never fully went away. It was about a female friend of a friend of mine. I didn't know her personally, but the way the story was told, and the details that came out later, made it feel uncomfortably real. She met a guy in a bar. Nothing about that part was unusual. It was a normal night out. Drinks, conversation, the usual kind of social setting where people meet all the time. From everything I was told, he didn't come across as aggressive or strange. He was charming enough, friendly, and seemed normal. The kind of guy you wouldn't think twice about talking to for an hour or two. At some point, he invited her back to his place for a drink. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. She agreed and went with him. No alarms going off in her head, no obvious red flags. Just one of those decisions people make all the time, trusting that they can read someone well enough to know whether they're safe. They got to his apartment and had a drink. She'd been there for a little while when she started to feel strange. Not just tipsy or tired, but genuinely unwell. Dizzy, heavy, disoriented. The kind of feeling where your body suddenly doesn't feel like it's responding the way it should. She excused herself and said she needed to use the toilet. That decision probably saved her life. Once she got into the bathroom and closed the door, the situation escalated fast. Whatever had been put in her drink was taking effect quickly. She realized she was losing control, that she might pass out. In that moment of clarity, she did the one thing she could still manage to do. She called the emergency number. She managed to give the address. She told them where she was. But before she could finish explaining what was happening, before she could even fully articulate that she had been drugged, she passed out. The call dropped. On the other end of the line, the emergency responder knew something was very wrong. People don't usually call emergency services from a stranger's bathroom and then go silent. The dispatcher treated it as an immediate, life-threatening situation and sent police, and I believe the fire department as well, straight to the address. When they arrived, they got no response at the door. They didn't wait. They forced entry. What happened next is the part that haunted her the most afterward, even more than the loss of consciousness. When the officers found her, they didn't just pick her up and carry her out. They put a bag over her head. She was unconscious when they did it. As they carried her outside, she began to wake up. Imagine that moment. Coming back to awareness, groggy, confused, your body heavy and unresponsive, and realizing you can't see anything because there's a bag over your head. You don't know where you are. You don't know who is touching you. You don't know why you can't see. For her, that was terrifying. She was taken to the hospital and physically recovered. But the psychological damage didn't just fade. Weeks later, she was seeing a psychologist to try to process what had happened. And what kept circling in her mind wasn't just that she had been drugged or that she had almost lost consciousness in a stranger's home. It was the bag. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would the police do that? Why would they cover her eyes while carrying her out? What was in that apartment that they didn't want her to see? What had she been lying near or next to or about to be taken to? That was so disturbing, it needed to be hidden from her even in that state. She asked the police. They wouldn't tell her. They gave vague answers. Safety reasons, procedure. Nothing concrete. Nothing that addressed the fear that had taken root in her mind. The unanswered question became its own trauma. Her imagination filled in the blanks, and every version her mind created was worse than the last. Eventually, her psychologist intervened. The psychologist argued that for her to recover mentally, she needed to know the truth, that withholding information was preventing her from processing the event, that her mind was stuck in a loop of fear because it sensed there was something being hidden from her. After pressure from the psychologist, the police finally disclosed the full story. What they found when they broke into the apartment was not just a man with a drugged woman inside. The entire house was covered in plastic. Walls, floors, furniture. Plastic sheeting everywhere, like the place had been prepared in advance for something that would involve blood, fluids, or damage that needed to be contained. Not something improvised, something planned. In the middle of the living room was a table. Not a normal table. A table with straps designed to tie someone down. Around it was a collection of knives and torture devices. Not one or two items. A collection. Tools chosen and kept for a specific purpose. The kind of things that don't exist accidentally in someone's home. That was why they put the bag over her head. They didn't want her to see any of it. The police believed, based on what they found, that she had been drugged intentionally so that he could torture her extensively. This wasn't about assault alone. This was about prolonged suffering. And from everything they could tell, death was most likely the intended outcome. She hadn't just narrowly avoided harm. She had narrowly avoided being killed. That knowledge changed everything for her. It reframed the entire experience. The sick feeling she had in the bathroom. The sudden loss of control. The urgency of that phone call. The reason the response had been so aggressive. The reason the police had acted the way they did. And yet, despite all of that, the outcome was almost as disturbing as the crime itself. The man faced virtually no punishment. The only thing he was actually convicted of was drugging her. Not attempted murder, not kidnapping, not preparation for torture, not possession of torture devices with intent, just the drugging. Because legally that was the only charge they could make stick beyond a reasonable doubt. Everything else was intent, circumstantial, prevented before it could be carried out. So he walked. After that, this young woman had to live in the same city as him again. Knowing what he had planned, knowing what he was capable of, knowing that he was still out there, moving through the same streets, shopping in the same stores, existing in the same space. That alone is horrifying. What made the story even more unsettling is that not long after hearing this, I heard a very similar story from a neighboring country, about 4 hours away. Different people, different city. But the same basic pattern. A man, a bar, a drink, a sudden illness, a bathroom, a call for help, a house prepared for something far worse than anyone could imagine. I've always wondered if the two situations were connected. I don't know if they were the same man. I don't know if they were a part of some larger pattern. I don't know if it was coincidence or something more disturbing. But the similarities were enough to make me uneasy in a way that never really went away. What gets to me most about this story isn't just the violence that almost happened. It's how close it came to succeeding. How easily it could have gone differently if she hadn't trusted her instincts in that one critical moment. If she hadn't gone to the bathroom. If she hadn't made that call when she did. If the dispatcher hadn't taken it seriously. It's also the reality of how limited justice can be when a crime is stopped before it fully happens. We like to believe that intent matters, that preparation matters, that narrowly avoided tragedies are treated with the seriousness they deserve. Often they aren't. The legal system deals in what can be proven, not in what was clearly about to happen. And that gap leaves people like her carrying the full weight of the truth, while the person who intended to destroy her life carries very little consequence. I think about how she had to rebuild a sense of safety, knowing that the man who had planned her torture was still free. How every familiar street probably felt different, how every stranger probably felt more dangerous, how trust, once shattered like that, doesn't come back easily. And I think about the bag. The fact that trained professionals saw something so horrific that they made a split-second decision to shield her from it, even while unconscious. That detail alone says more than words ever could about what was waiting for her in that apartment. Some stories stay with you because they're shocking. This one stays with me because it reveals how thin the margin can be between an ordinary night and something unimaginably horrific. How survival can hinge on a single decision made while your body is already failing you. And how sometimes, even when someone escapes the worst, they're still left to carry the knowledge of how close they came. I don't know if those two stories were connected, but I do know that the world contains people who plan things like that, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment, and the thought that someone like that can walk free, known to the system but not stopped by it, is something I've never been able to fully shake. We lived in a small ancestral compound, the kind where multiple generations and a few tenants all shared the same space. It was my family, some relatives, and a handful of renters, all living close together. In the early 2000s, life there felt simple and familiar. Most nights, everyone gathered in the living room to watch Filipino telenovelas, the TV glowing late into the evening. The adults would sit together, commenting on the drama, while me and my cousins played cards in the corner, laughing quietly and feeling like the world was small and safe. It really was a tight-knit community, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's routines. One of the tenants was a student. We called her Mary. She was quiet and kept to herself, a little aloof, but nothing about her seemed alarming at first. Over time, though, something changed. Weeks before everything happened, she became noticeably different. She barely came out of her room. When she did, her expression was distant, almost blank. She stopped engaging with anyone. My mother noticed it right away. She would gently check on her, asking how school was going, if anything was bothering her, if she was okay. Mary would answer but never really open up. Looking back now, it feels painfully obvious that something was very wrong. I can still vividly remember the night everything fell apart. It was around 2 a.m. Me and my cousins were still awake, watching our uncles prepare pigs for an event the next day. There was noise, movement, the usual late-night activity that sometimes happened in our compound. My mom came into my room and scolded us, telling us to go to sleep because it was already past midnight. Then suddenly, there was a scream. Not a normal scream. Not the kind you hear during an argument or from someone startled. This was pure horror. Someone had found a dead infant in our backyard. Even now, writing this, my chest tightens. The scene was beyond anything a child should ever see. The baby had been strangled with her own umbilical cord. Her neck was broken. A mop head had been forced into her mouth, destroying her throat. She had been placed inside a clear plastic bag, bloody and messy, and left hanging near our dirty kitchen. My mom rushed us inside immediately, trying to shield us, but I glanced back for just a second. That image burned itself into my memory. I will never forget it. No matter how many years pass, it's still there, as clear as if it happened yesterday. It didn't take long to realize who was responsible. There were blood trails leading straight to Mary's room. The truth came out quickly after that. Mary had been pregnant and was terrified of her parents finding out. She had been hiding it, growing more isolated, more depressed, and clearly not in her right state of mind. She gave birth alone in secret, and what followed was an act of unimaginable violence and desperation. By morning, her parents were there. Police, paramedics. The compound was filled with strangers, flashing lights, hushed voices. Everything felt unreal, like we were watching something that couldn't possibly be happening in the place we called home. My memory of that part is hazy, but I remember hearing that Mary was taken to a psychiatric facility. After that, she was just gone. But the story didn't end there. Days later, I started hearing adults whispering about my mother. They said she was being haunted by the child. Our house was old, with large built-in cabinets and deep wardrobes that creaked and shifted with age. My mom began hearing things. Crying, soft and distant like a baby's wail coming from inside the wardrobe. She heard small footsteps in the hallway, crackling sounds at night when everything else was still. She told someone she kept seeing a vision of a child inside a bloody plastic bag, standing in the hallway. What confused us was that it was only happening to her. None of us saw or heard what she did. We didn't understand why she was the one experiencing it. Maybe it was because she had tried to help Mary. Maybe because she was the one who always checked on her. Maybe because she had seen too much that night and carried the weight of it differently. The atmosphere in the compound changed after that. The sense of safety was gone. The walls felt heavier. Nights felt longer. Even during the day, there was an unspoken tension, like the place itself was holding on to what had happened. A few months later, we left the compound. We didn't talk much about it after that. Life moved on, as it always does. But some things don't fade. Some images don't soften with time. Some memories stay sharp no matter how old you get. That night, that child, and the way everything unraveled so suddenly are things I carry with me. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was the moment I learned that horror doesn't always come from strangers or faraway places. Sometimes it grows quietly, behind a closed door, in a place that once felt like home. When I was in my mid-20s, my wife and I moved very suddenly from Europe back to the United States, where I'm originally from. The whole thing happened fast. Faster than either of us really had time to process. One week we were packing our lives into suitcases, saying rushed goodbyes, tying up loose ends. And the next we were stepping off a plane in a country that felt familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Jet lag, stress, excitement, and exhaustion all blended together into this strange mental fog. One of the first practical things we had to do after landing was get mobile phones. We went to a store, picked out phones, got new numbers, and walked out with them still feeling slightly unreal in our hands. At that point, my wife was literally the only person in the world who had my new phone number. I hadn't contacted friends yet. I hadn't updated accounts. I hadn't logged into anything. The number existed in a vacuum. That night, after everything was set up, we went out for a couple of drinks. Nothing wild. Just enough to unwind after the move and feel like we were finally allowed to breathe. Then we went home and went straight to sleep, completely wiped out. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I did was check my phone. I had several missed calls and one voicemail. I remember sitting up in bed, suddenly alert, that fog lifting instantly. My first thought was that maybe something had gone wrong with the phone company, or maybe the number had been recycled and someone was trying to reach whoever had it before me. That seemed like the most reasonable explanation, even though it didn't fully make sense. I played the voicemail. There was no background noise, no introduction, no explanation. Just a voice, someone repeating my name. over and over. It wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was almost pleading. A kind of whimpering tone, like someone was scared or desperate or in pain. They said my name again and again for nearly a full minute, never changing rhythm, never adding anything else. No hello, no call me back, no context, just my name. I sat there frozen, phone in my hand, listening to it all the way through. My wife watched my face change and asked what was wrong. I played it for her, and the room felt different immediately after. Quieter, heavier. I checked the call log again. All the missed calls came from the same number. A number I didn't recognize. A number that shouldn't have known me. We tried calling it back. Nothing. No ring. No voicemail. Nothing. I never got another call from that number again. No explanation ever surfaced. No follow-up. No accidental text. Nothing that would make it make sense. Even now, years later, I still don't have a rational explanation that fully satisfies me. It wasn't threatening, but that almost made it worse. It felt intimate in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Someone knew my name, had my number, and sounded like they needed me, and then vanished. That voicemail still sits in my memory, like an unanswered question I'll never get closure on. The second thing happened not long after that in my first apartment back in the U.S. I was living alone at the time, in a ground-floor apartment on the edge of town. It backed up against a semi-wooded area, not deep forest, but enough trees and brush that it felt secluded, especially at night. The place was cheap, quiet, and a little isolated, which at the time I didn't mind. I liked the privacy. My bedroom had 2 windows on separate walls. One faced the side yard, the other faced the back, closer to the trees. I didn't think much of it at first. During the day, everything felt normal. One night, I was in bed when I became aware of something outside my bedroom window. At first, it was just a feeling. That subtle sense that something isn't right, that you're not as alone as you think you are. Then I heard movement, soft footsteps, the sound of someone shifting their weight on dirt or leaves. I stayed still and listened. After a minute, I was sure. Someone was outside my bedroom window. I didn't move right away. I just lay there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I was wrong. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was someone walking past. But the sounds didn't move away. They lingered. And then I realized something worse. They were moving from one window to the other, slowly, deliberately. At some point, it became clear that they knew I was aware of them. You can feel that kind of awareness, like a silent acknowledgement passing between 2 people who can't see each other. And yet, despite that, they didn't leave. They stayed there, pacing between my windows, just out of sight. Every time I lifted the blinds, even slightly, to look out, they would step out of view. Perfect timing. Like they were watching the reflection, or my shadow, or just anticipating the movement. It felt like a game, and I was the only one who hadn't agreed to play. This went on for several minutes. Minutes, stretched differently when you're scared. Each one felt long and heavy. My mind ran through possibilities. A burglar, someone casing the place, a peeping Tom, something worse. The fact that they weren't trying to break in, weren't trying to leave, weren't making demands, made it more unsettling. They were just there. Eventually, fear turned into anger. I got out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat I kept nearby, and something in me snapped. I didn't want to hide anymore. I didn't want to wait and see what they decided to do next. I ran outside, bat in hand, screaming that they were fucking with the wrong guy. The person bolted. I caught a glimpse of movement disappearing into the darkness, fast and panicked. Whoever it was clearly hadn't expected that response. They hadn't expected a 6-foot-tall guy to come charging out of the house yelling with a weapon. They were gone within seconds, swallowed up by the trees. I stood there for a long time afterward, heart racing, adrenaline shaking through my arms, listening to the night settle back into silence. Later, when I calmed down, the most unsettling part clicked into place. The previous tenant in that apartment had been an attractive young woman. I had met her briefly when I signed the lease. Suddenly, the behavior made a lot more sense. The timing, the windows, the patience. It felt very likely that whoever had been outside wasn't there for me at all, at least not originally. They were there because they thought someone else still lived there. That realization stuck with me. The idea that someone might have been watching that apartment for a long time, that they felt comfortable enough to linger even when they knew they'd been noticed, that if I had reacted differently, if I had frozen instead of getting angry, that night might have gone very differently. Both of those experiences left marks on me in quiet ways. Neither involved direct violence, neither came with clear answers. But both stripped away a sense of certainty I didn't even realize I had before. The belief that anonymity protects you, that home is always safe, that being cautious is enough. Sometimes the scariest things aren't what happens, but what almost happens, and the fact that you never fully understand why. When I was 17, my partner and I were packing up the only home I had ever known. I had grown up there. Every version of me existed in that house somewhere, layered into the walls, the floors, the smells, the quiet routines. It wasn't a move we had chosen. My relatives had decided to sell the house and place my 90-year-old aunt into a care home, and everything happened fast, without much room for grief or discussion. One day it was home, and the next it was something we were meant to empty and abandon. The whole experience felt brutal and unreal. I was still a kid, really, and suddenly the ground under my life was being pulled away. Every room echoed differently as furniture disappeared. The walls felt colder. Sounds carried farther. Even daylight seemed harsher coming through bare windows. Packing boxes didn't feel like organizing belongings. It felt like erasing proof that we had ever lived there. My partner was with me through all of it. That was the only reason I could function at all. We worked side by side, taping boxes, sorting through decades of accumulated things, deciding what mattered and what didn't. Every object seemed to carry weight. Old photos, dishes that had been used for family dinners I barely remembered. Furniture that had always just existed, now suddenly fragile and temporary. The basement was the worst part. It had always been creepy. Even when the house was full and alive, it was cold year-round, with concrete floors that seemed to suck warmth straight out of your feet. The air down there felt stale, heavy, like it didn't circulate properly. The lighting was dim and uneven, casting long shadows that made corners feel deeper than they should have been. As a child, I avoided it whenever possible. There was always a sense that you weren't supposed to linger there. Now, with the house almost empty, the basement felt even more wrong, louder in its silence, bigger, more exposed. Near the end of packing, my partner suggested we do one last sweep, just to make sure nothing important had been left behind. I didn't want to go down there alone, but with them beside me, I felt brave enough to try. We went down slowly, our footsteps echoing off the concrete. The cold hit immediately, wrapping around us like damp cloth. Most of the basement was bare by then. Old shelves stood empty, Boxes were stacked neatly near the stairs, waiting to be carried up. The space felt stripped down to its bones. As we moved deeper into the basement, we noticed a small closet area, tucked off to one side, something I hadn't paid much attention to before. Inside was my aunt's sewing machine. It sat there quietly, like it had been forgotten mid-life, surrounded by dust and shadow. Next to it was a large, heavy shelf, the kind made of thick wood that looked like it had been there for decades. It wasn't flimsy or decorative. It was solid, functional, and clearly not meant to be moved often. As we stood there, something caught my eye behind the shelf. There was a door. At least, that's what it looked like. An older door, partially obscured by the shelf, with a shape and outline that stood out clearly once you noticed it. It wasn't modern. It had one of those old skeleton key locks, the kind you only see in very old houses or antique shops. The wood looked aged, darker than the surrounding walls, like it belonged to a different time. My heart started beating faster. I pointed it out to my partner, and they saw it immediately. There was no confusion, no hesitation. We both stood there staring at it, the same thought clearly forming in both our minds. How had we never noticed this before? What was behind it? Why was it hidden? I stepped closer and reached for the knob. The metal was cold under my fingers. I turned it gently. It was locked. The shelf in front of it was too heavy to move easily. We tried shifting it just a little, but it barely budged. It felt anchored, like it had been placed there deliberately and left alone for a very long time. We exchanged looks, half excited, half uneasy. We decided to leave it for the moment. There was still work to do, and we didn't have the tools or strength to move the shelf safely right then. We agreed we'd come back later, maybe with help, and figure out what the door led to. Storage? An old room? Something forgotten entirely? The possibilities rattled around in my head as we went back upstairs. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The house was almost empty now, and every sound felt amplified. I lay awake, replaying the image of that door in my mind, the way it looked older than everything around it, the way it felt out of place and yet completely intentional. It didn't feel like something that had been accidentally overlooked. It felt hidden. Eventually, I brought it up to my mom. I asked her if she knew anything about a door in the basement, behind a shelf near my aunt's sewing machine. She looked genuinely puzzled. She said she had lived in that house for years and had never known about any door there. At first, she thought maybe I was mistaken, but when I described it in detail, she became curious instead of dismissive. She wanted to see it. So the three of us went back down to the basement together. The air felt colder than before. The light flickered slightly as we turned it on. We walked to the same spot, the same closet area, the same sewing machine, the same heavy shelf. The shelf was still there. The sewing machine was still there. But the door was gone. Not hidden, not obscured. Gone. Where the door had been was now a solid cement wall, smooth, unbroken, uniform. There was no outline, no seam, no sign that a door had ever existed there at all. I felt my stomach drop. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, scanning the wall for any trace of what we had seen earlier. Nothing. It looked like it had always been that way, like it had been poured and sealed decades ago. The shelf hadn't moved. The sewing machine hadn't shifted. Everything else was exactly as we had left it. My mom looked confused and concerned. She asked what we were talking about, where exactly the door had been. I pointed to the spot, my hand shaking slightly. My partner backed me up immediately, describing the same door, the same lock, the same position behind the shelf. We weren't contradicting each other. We weren't uncertain. We both knew exactly what we had seen. My mom just stared at the wall. She ran her hand over it, knocking lightly, as if expecting a hollow sound. It was solid, real, unquestionable. There was no way a door had been there earlier that day, at least not in any normal sense. The three of us stood there in silence for a long time. No one had an explanation. There was no construction noise, no dust, no debris, no sign that anything had been altered between the time my partner and I first saw the door and the moment we returned. The idea that someone could have bricked it up in the span of a few hours without leaving any trace was impossible. And even if they had, why would they? And how would they have known? My partner and I exchanged a look that said everything. We both knew we weren't mistaken. We both knew we hadn't imagined it. The memory was too clear, too specific. The lock, the wood, the way it felt when I turned the knob. You don't hallucinate details like that in the same way, at the same time, independently. We left the basement not long after. The rest of the move passed in a blur. Boxes were loaded. Doors were closed for the last time. The house emptied completely. My aunt was moved into care. Life moved forward because it had to, even though it felt like something unfinished had been left behind. Years have passed since then. My partner and I still talk about that day. Not often, but when we do, the details are always the same. The memory hasn't softened or changed with time. If anything, it feels sharper now, standing out against everything else that has faded. I don't know what that door was. I don't know where it led. I don't know why it appeared to us when it did, or why it vanished so completely afterward. Sometimes I wonder if the stress of that time played a role. I was losing my home, my stability, my sense of belonging all at once. The house was in transition, stripped down and exposed like it was shedding layers of itself. Maybe something surfaced that had always been there, hidden, waiting for the right moment. Other times, I think about the house itself, how old it was, how many lives had passed through it before mine, how many changes it had seen, how many things had been built over, sealed up, forgotten. Houses like that carry history in ways we don't fully understand. And sometimes, I think about the timing. That door appeared during one of the most chaotic, emotionally raw moments of my life. A moment defined by loss, displacement, and endings. It showed itself just long enough to be seen, acknowledged, and then erased, like it didn't belong to the future we were moving into. Whatever it was, it marked me. The memory of that vanished door is tied forever to the feeling of that time. The grief, the confusion, the sense that reality itself was unstable, shifting under my feet. It's a haunting memory, not because it was overtly frightening, but because it defied explanation in such a quiet, absolute way. There was no jump scare, no noise, no threat, just a door that existed and then didn't. And no matter how many years passed, no matter how much distance I put between myself and that house, that moment remains unresolved. A small, silent mystery that surfaced during the collapse of my childhood world and disappeared just as suddenly, leaving behind only certainty in one thing. We both saw it. And I don't think I'll ever stop wondering why. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. A few years ago, I was listening to an episode of This American Life, and one of the guests was Edgar Queret. He told a story that has never really left me. It wasn't framed as horror, and there was nothing dramatic about how he told it. If anything, it was quiet and reflective, which somehow made it worse. The kind of story that settles into you slowly and then stays there. He talked about his mother and about the day she died. As she was dying, she said something simple and devastating. She said that she was finally going to see her mother again. Her mother had died during World War II, murdered by German soldiers. For Edgar's mother, that reunion wasn't symbolic or poetic. It was... Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. A few years ago, I was listening to an episode of This American Life, and one of the guests was Edgar Queret. He told a story that has never really left me. It wasn't framed as horror, and there was nothing dramatic about how he told it. If anything, it was quiet and reflective, which somehow made it worse. The kind of story that settles into you slowly and then stays there. He talked about his mother and about the day she died. As she was dying, she said something simple and devastating. She said that she was finally going to see her mother again. Her mother had died during World War II, murdered by German soldiers. For Edgar's mother, that reunion wasn't symbolic or poetic. It was literal in her mind. After a lifetime of carrying that loss, she believed she was finally going back to her. Then he told the story of how his grandmother died. Edgar's grandmother was Jewish and living in a ghetto during the war. One day, German soldiers were chasing people through the streets. She was running with her 2 children, one older and one still a baby. They climbed up onto rooftops, jumping from building to building, trying to escape. Eventually, they reached a point where there was nowhere left to run. The rooftops ended. The soldiers were close. She knew she couldn't outrun them while carrying a baby, and she knew that if she stayed, all 3 of them would be killed. So she made a decision no parent should ever have to make. She told her older child, Edgar's mother, to jump to the next building. She told her to keep running and not to look back. She refused to abandon her baby, but she still wanted at least one of her children to have a chance to live. Edgar's mother jumped. But instead of running, she hid. She couldn't make herself leave. She stayed close enough to see what happened next. The soldiers caught her mother. They shot her. She died there on the rooftop. But that wasn't the end of it. Edgar explained that the soldiers didn't want to waste bullets on the baby. His grandmother had been holding her infant son when she was killed. The soldiers took the child and threw him against a brick wall until he died. They smashed his skull. That image is unbearable. When I heard this story, I had a baby of my own. I was breastfeeding at the time. In the same episode, Edgar also tells another story about his grandmother breastfeeding while they were trying to escape, trying to keep her baby quiet and alive while running from soldiers. Hearing that detail while I was literally feeding my own child made the whole thing feel impossibly close. It collapsed the distance between history and the present. This wasn't some abstract atrocity from a textbook. This was a mother, a baby, a body doing the same thing mine was doing under circumstances so cruel they almost defy comprehension. What haunts me most isn't just the violence, though that alone is horrific. It's the layering of it. The grandmother knowing she was going to die. The choice she made to save one child. The daughter being told not to look back and being unable to obey. The soldiers choosing cruelty even when death had already been delivered. The baby never having a chance to understand anything at all. Edgar didn't tell the story to shock people. He told it because it explained something about his mother, about her grief, about the way trauma echoes through generations, about how the past never really stays in the past. His mother carried that rooftop with her for her entire life. And in her final moments, she wasn't thinking about doctors or hospitals or the present day. She was thinking about her mother, frozen forever in that moment of loss. I've heard many stories about the Holocaust, but this one lodged itself somewhere deeper. Maybe because of the specificity. Maybe because of the baby. Maybe because of the calm way it was told. Or maybe because I was holding my own child while listening, feeling how fragile and absolute that bond is, and realizing how violently it had been torn apart for someone else. Every so often, it comes back to me. Not as a full narrative, but as flashes. A rooftop. A mother's voice telling her child to run. A baby being held. A wall. It's not something I dwell on intentionally, but it's there, under the surface, waiting. The episode itself is much more powerful than any summary can be. Hearing Edgar tell it, in his own voice, gives it a weight that's hard to describe. But even stripped down like this, the story still carries its horror. Not the kind that makes you jump, but the kind that makes you sit quietly afterward, holding your child a little closer and wondering how human beings could do that to one another. It's a reminder that some stories don't end when the people in them die. They continue, passed down, resurfacing decades later in moments you don't expect. And once you've truly heard them, they never fully let you go. When I look back at my childhood, it feels less like a series of memories and more like a collection of scars, both seen and unseen. For a long time, I didn't realize that the world wasn't supposed to be heavy. I thought the weight I carried was just part of growing up. My story begins when I was only 7 years old, a time when most kids are worried about school projects or what they want for their birthdays. For me, that was the year the foundation of my world began to crumble. My mother was the first to slip away. It started with pills, mostly OxyContin, though I didn't understand the names of the chemicals back then. To a 7-year-old, it just looked like Mom was tired or different. But addiction is a hungry monster that never stops eating. Eventually, the pills weren't enough, and she moved on to heroin. Later, it became a devastating cycle of crack and heroin. We lived in our childhood home at first, but soon that was gone. We moved into a house that was almost entirely empty, save for the shadows. There were days when she simply wouldn't wake up. I would sit there with my 4-year-old brother, the silence of the house ringing in my ears, knowing there was no food in the kitchen. Yet, in the strange, resilient way children do, I was still happy. I had my brother, and I had the hope that things might change. It was around this time that my father showed me a side of himself I had never seen. I remember it vividly because it was the first time he ever laid a hand on me. We were at my cousin's house, and I had refused to clean their room. It was a small act of defiance, the kind any child might show, but his reaction was explosive. He didn't just scold me. He picked me up by my arms and swung me with such force that I flew across the room. The air left my lungs as I hit the floor. Strangely, he bought me McDonald's afterward. To my young mind, the fries and the toy were an apology, a sign that everything was okay again. I was a tough kid, and I bounced back, not knowing that this was merely the prologue to a much darker story. By the time I was 9, the situation with my mother had become impossible. Social services or family intervened, and I was sent to live with my father. At the time, I cried and wished I could stay with my mom. Even with the hunger and the drugs, there was a softness there that I knew I was losing. My father hadn't touched me since the incident with the cousin's room, but as soon as I moved in, the violence returned with a terrifying precision. I don't even remember what I did to trigger him that first time at his house, but I remember the object in his hand. He threw a screwdriver at me. It wasn't a warning, it was a weapon. The metal sliced my knee open, leaving a jagged red mark that served as a permanent reminder that I was no longer safe. The abuse started as a slow drip. A slap here, a heavy object thrown there. It was infrequent enough that I could almost convince myself it was normal, or that I had done something to deserve it. But then he started dating the woman who would become his wife, and the drip turned into a flood. My father's anger wasn't just reserved for me. It was a poison that touched everything around him. He brought home a cat, a small, innocent creature that eventually did something to irritate him. In a fit of rage, he began throwing the cat against the wall over and over. I was screaming, begging him to stop, my voice raw with terror. He turned his fury on me, kicking me with such force that I was launched into the wall myself. The cat didn't survive that night. Not long after, he got a dog named Sheba. One day, we were gone for 12 hours, leaving the poor animal trapped inside. Naturally, Sheba couldn't hold it any longer and pooped on the floor. When we returned and my father saw the mess, he lost his mind. He beat that dog within an inch of her life. He was flinging her through the air with such violence that she was losing control of her bowels mid-flight. We didn't know it then, but Sheba was pregnant. A few days later, she gave birth to 5 or 6 stillborn puppies. That afternoon remains burned into my mind. My father took the tiny, cold bodies of the puppies and stuffed them into a plastic Kroger grocery bag. He handed the bag to me and told me to take them to the trash. I was a child, and the weight of those small lives in my hand was more than I could bear. I stood there sobbing, my chest heaving, unable to move toward the dumpster. My father didn't offer comfort or even a moment of silence. He kicked me down the stairs and threw the bag of corpses at me. I crawled to my feet, picked up the bag, and did as I was told. As I grew older, the rules of the house became a minefield. One school night, I was woken up by the sounds of my father and stepmother having sex. In a moment of childish frustration and confusion, I grabbed a Beanie Baby from my bed and threw it at their bedroom door. I just wanted them to be quiet so I could sleep. My father stormed into my room, his face twisted with rage. He was a massive man, 6 feet tall and weighing 300 pounds. He grabbed that soft, plush toy and used it to beat me. People don't realize how much a small object can hurt when it's backed by the full strength of a grown man. By the time he was done, I was bruised and shaking, realizing that even my toys could be turned against me. By the time I turned 10, the violence was a daily ritual. It became the background noise of my life. If I got lice from school, he didn't just treat it, he slammed my head into the table while checking me. If I washed a dish and left a single spot of grease, he wouldn't confront me then. He would wait until I was fast asleep, then drag me from my bed in the middle of the night to beat me. The incidents began to blend together, the punching, the kicking, the being swung around by my hair. But some moments stand out with horrifying clarity, because they were the moments I thought I would die. One afternoon, He had me outside breaking down a massive pile of sticks and logs. I had been doing it for a week straight, and my small body was exhausted. I made the mistake of asking for a day off. Without a word, he took the handle of a broom and shoved it into my throat, pinning me down. I couldn't breathe. I was on the floor, gasping like a fish out of water, my eyes bulging as I looked up at him. He just stared down at me, cold and indifferent, watching me struggle for life. When he finally decided I'd learned my lesson, he removed the broom and began to massage my trachea until I could draw a ragged breath again. I lay there in the dirt, knowing that my life was entirely in his hands. Violence could find me anywhere, even in public. We were sitting in a McDonald's drive-thru line one day, and I was sitting in the back seat, quietly reading a book. Without warning, my father reached back with the lid of the center console, a heavy plastic piece that had broken off, and slammed it into the side of my head. Stars exploded in my vision, and a dull ringing filled my ears. He yelled at me to stop humming, claiming he had told me multiple times to be quiet. I hadn't been humming. I hadn't made a sound. I was just a target of opportunity. When we moved to a new house, I felt a spark of hope. Because our new neighbors were childhood friends I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't allowed to leave the house, but one day I saw them through my bedroom window. I leaned out, my heart racing with excitement, and started talking to them, trying to catch up on everything I had missed. My father must have heard my voice. He burst into the room, grabbed me by my hair, and slammed me into the wall with such force that I left a me-sized dent in the plaster. I often wonder if that hole is still there, a ghost of the girl who just wanted a friend. The physical pain was varied and creative. Once he took a board with rusted nails sticking out of it and hit me in the head. The amount of blood was terrifying. It soaked through my hair and clothes, but he didn't take me to a doctor. Another time, he took a power drill to my leg. To this day, I carry a perfectly circular scar on my shin, a permanent brand from a man who should have been my protector. By the age of 12, the weight of it all became too much. I tried to end it. I took a belt and fashioned a noose in my closet, hoping to find a way out of the nightmare. But the closet bar was weak. It snapped under my weight, and I fell to the floor. Even death didn't want me yet. Hunger was my constant companion. My father and stepmother fed me the same portions as my 5-year-old stepsister, which was nowhere near enough for a growing preteen. I was always starving. I started sneaking into the kitchen at night to steal scraps of food, which only led to more beatings when I was caught. My stepsisters eventually realized they could use this to their advantage. They would get into things they weren't supposed to, like my stepmother's tampons, and leave them in the middle of my floor. My father didn't ask questions. He just stomped on me. They once ate butter straight from the container with their fingers, and even though my fingers were clearly much larger, the blame fell on me. I didn't even like butter, but the truth never mattered in that house. My life was a prison. My real name hadn't been used in years. I was referred to only by insults. He would send me into stores to shoplift for him, forcing me to become a criminal to satisfy his needs. By the time I was 13, I was living in a literal cell. My bedroom door was fitted with 2 different deadbolts because I had learned how to pick the first one. My windows were nailed shut so I couldn't escape. My bed was nothing more than 2 old couch cushions on the floor. In the corner of my closet, I had a pee bucket because they would often forget to unlock my door in the morning, leaving me trapped for hours. If the bucket was discovered, I was beaten for it, even though they were the ones who had locked me in. Before the windows were nailed shut, I used to climb out of my second-story window and sneak back into the house through a dining room window I kept unlocked. just so I could use a real bathroom or find a drop of water. The desperation of needing to use the restroom while being locked away is a type of psychological torture that is hard to describe. The end came when I got suspended from school. The reason was almost comical. I had printed out a silly poem about a teacher being a dinosaur. But in my house, suspension was a death sentence. I knew that if I went home that day, I might not survive the night. When the school bus dropped me off, I didn't walk toward the house. I just kept walking. I wandered the streets of the west side of my city for hours, crossing from one end to the other and back again as the sun began to set. I was cold, I was exhausted, and I was starving. Eventually, I ended up at a Kroger grocery store, the same chain where those puppies had been taken years before. I intended to steal something to eat, but as I walked through the aisles, I saw a friend from school with her mother. I didn't try to hide. I walked up to them and begged them to let me stay the night. The words poured out of me. The locks, the drill, the hunger, the broom handle. I told them everything. My friend's mother looked at me with a mixture of horror and pity that I will never forget. She didn't take me home with her. Instead, she picked up her phone and called the police. For the first time in my life, the system worked. I never went back to that house. And while the scars on my shin and my heart remain, the girl in the me-sized hole finally found her way out. I have spent a long time healing from the things that happened in those years. It's a journey that doesn't really have an end, but rather a series of milestones where I learned that I am worthy of safety and kindness. My past is a heavy one, but it doesn't define where I am going. I survived the unthinkable, and in doing so, I found a strength that my father could never break, no matter how hard he tried. When my mom was a teenager, something happened in her family that stayed with her for the rest of her life. It wasn't just a tragic story people talked about once and then moved on from. It became one of those memories that settles deep inside you, the kind that changes how you see people, how you listen to conversations, and how you understand the idea that evil doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Back then, life felt simpler on the surface. Teenagers gathered at parties. People knew each other's families, and serious danger didn't feel like something that lived close to home. If someone didn't come home one night, the first instinct wasn't panic. People assumed misunderstandings, arguments, impulsive decisions, running away. No one wanted to believe the worst. My mom had a cousin around her age, a young woman who was well known in the family and in the community. She had friends, plans, and a life that looked normal from the outside. One day, she didn't come home. At first, there wasn't immediate alarm. People asked around. Friends said they hadn't seen her. Family members tried calling. Hours passed, then a full day. By the second day, worry started to creep in. That's when the police were contacted. The initial theories were the ones people cling to because they feel less terrifying. The police thought she might have run away. Maybe she was upset. Maybe she wanted to start over somewhere else. That idea, painful as it was, still allowed room for hope. A runaway might come back. A runaway might be alive. The other theory was darker, but still abstract enough that people didn't want to fully believe it. Maybe her boyfriend had something to do with it. They had argued recently. People knew they didn't always get along, but accusing someone directly felt too extreme at that stage. It was easier to keep things vague. Search parties were organized. For over a week, people went out looking for her. Friends, family, neighbors, volunteers. They searched fields, roads, wooded areas, ditches. They called her name. They looked for clothing, footprints, anything that might point them in the right direction. The atmosphere was heavy with fear and hope at the same time. Every day without answers made the silence louder. The boyfriend was around during all of this. That's one of the details that still chills people when they hear the story. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He stayed in the same social circles, talking to the same people who were worried sick about the girl who was missing. He showed up where everyone else did. On the surface, he acted like just another confused, worried teenager. One night, while the search was still ongoing, there was a party. That alone says something about how people cope with fear. Teenagers especially don't know how to sit with dread for long periods of time. They distract themselves. They drink. They gather together because being alone feels worse. The party wasn't celebratory. It was more like a desperate attempt to feel normal for a few hours. The boyfriend was there. A group of teenagers were sitting around, drinking, talking. And of course, the conversation kept coming back to the missing girl. It couldn't not. She was all anyone could think about. People talked about where she might be, what might have happened, whether she would be found, whether she was still alive. The boyfriend sat there listening. At some point, he started singing. At first, no one paid much attention. People assumed he was just drunk, slurring words, mumbling like people do when alcohol loosens their tongue. His voice blended into the noise of the party. But then, he kept going. He got louder and louder. The words started to become clearer. People stopped talking. Someone laughed nervously at first, thinking it might be a joke in bad taste. But the laughter died quickly as the meaning of the words sank in. They're looking in the bushes, they're looking in the weeds, but they're never gonna find her, 'cause I hid her in the trees. The room went silent. Not the awkward silence of a bad joke, but the kind of silence that feels like the air has been sucked out. People stared at him, trying to process what they had just heard. Some of them thought they must have misunderstood. Surely no one would say something like that if it weren't a sick joke. Surely no one would confess to something so horrific in the middle of a party. But he didn't backtrack. He didn't stop. He kept singing it, repeating the lines louder each time, like he was proud of it, like he enjoyed the attention, like the alcohol had stripped away whatever restraint he had left and allowed the truth to spill out in the worst possible way. Someone left the room to call the police. Others just sat there, frozen, staring at him, realizing that they were listening to a confession, not whispered, not hidden, sung. Police arrived quickly. The party atmosphere disappeared instantly. The boyfriend was taken in for questioning. Word spread fast. The same people who had been searching the woods for over a week now felt a cold, sinking realization that they might have been searching in the wrong way, or not carefully enough. The police went back to the wooded areas. This time, they searched with new information, and they found her. Her body had been hidden in the trees, just like he had said. Not buried neatly, not left whole. She had been dismembered, her body separated and placed in different parts of the wooded area. It was done deliberately, as if he believed it would make her harder to find, as if turning her into pieces would somehow erase what he had done. The search was over, but the horror was just beginning. For my mom and her family, the news was devastating in a way that words can't really capture. The hope they had clung to, even when it felt thin, was gone, replaced with a truth so violent and cruel that it shattered their sense of safety. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't some faceless monster from outside their world. This was someone the girl trusted, someone who had been sitting among friends, drinking, talking, singing. Someone who had been watching people worry and suffer while knowing exactly where her body was. That details what makes the story unbearable to think about. The casual cruelty of it. The way he blended into the search, into the conversations, into the fear, while carrying the knowledge of what he had done. The way he turned a confession into a song, as if the reality of her death was something he could treat lightly. My mom said that after that, nothing felt the same. People became more guarded. Parents watched their children more closely. Trust didn't come as easily. The idea that you could truly know someone was shaken. If a person could hide something like that behind a familiar face, behind shared jokes and drinks, then what else were people capable of? The boyfriend was arrested and charged. Justice, in the legal sense, followed. But it didn't undo the damage. It didn't bring her back. It didn't erase the image of teenagers sitting at a party, slowly realizing they were hearing a murder confession in real time. It didn't remove the guilt some people felt for not recognizing the signs sooner, even though there may have been no clear signs at all. For my mom, the story became one of those cautionary memories that never faded. She carried it with her into adulthood, into motherhood. It influenced how she talked about relationships, about trust, about paying attention to red flags even when they seemed small or uncomfortable. It also taught her something darker. That evil doesn't always hide. Sometimes it talks. Sometimes it laughs. Sometimes it sings. And sometimes the most horrifying truths come out not through careful investigation, but through arrogance, drunkenness, and the belief that no one will truly hear you. The image of that night stays with me even though I wasn't there. A group of young people sitting together trying to distract themselves from fear and slowly realizing that the person next to them isn't just another worried boyfriend, but the reason the girl is never coming home. That moment where confusion turns into dread, where words stop being just sounds and become proof. What also lingers is the idea of how close everyone was to the truth without knowing it. Searching bushes and weeds, calling her name, hoping for a miracle, while the person responsible sat among them watching it all unfold. It's a level of psychological cruelty that's hard to fully understand. You want to believe that guilt always shows itself, that people who do terrible things can't keep it inside. In this case, that belief was both true and horrifying. He couldn't keep it in, but when it came out in a way that felt almost mocking. My mom said that after the body was found, the woods never felt the same. Trees that once seemed ordinary became reminders of what had been hidden there. Paths people used to walk without thinking became places of quiet reflection and unease. Nature, which often feels neutral or comforting, had been used as a hiding place for something unspeakable. Even decades later, when she talks about it, her voice changes. Not dramatically, but subtly. Slower. Quieter. Like she's still choosing her words carefully, even now. The story isn't just about a murder. It's about innocence lost, not just for the girl who died, but for everyone who heard that song and understood what it meant. For me, hearing this story growing up shaped the way I think about safety and unpredictability. It reinforced the idea that terrible things don't always come with warning signs or obvious villains. Sometimes they come wrapped in familiarity, in relationships, in shared spaces, in moments that feel ordinary right up until they aren't. It also highlights how fragile our assumptions are. The police assumed she ran away. People assumed the boyfriend was just another worried partner. Teenagers assumed singing was just drunken nonsense. Each assumption bought him time. Each assumption delayed the truth. And then, in one horrifying moment, the truth forced its way out. The story still comes back to me sometimes, especially when I think about how often people say, "You never think something like that could happen here," or "You never think it will happen to someone you know." But it does. And when it does, it changes the shape of memory, turning ordinary moments into markers of before and after. That's why this story affected my mom so deeply, and why it still echoes through our family. Not just because of the violence, but because of how close everyone was to the person responsible, how easily he hid in plain sight, and how casually the truth slipped out. You never know when the person sitting next to you knows something unspeakable. You never know when a joke, a song, or a careless moment will reveal a reality too terrible to ignore. And once you've learned that, once you've seen how quickly trust can turn into horror, you never quite see people or the world the same way again. This is one of those stories that people in my country talk about quietly. The kind that gets passed around over time and slowly takes on a life of its own. It isn't just a crime story. It's a story about survival, bad choices, and how easy it is to fall into something you never meant to be part of. What makes it unsettling isn't just the crime itself, but how ordinary everything feels at the start, and how long it takes before the full weight of what's happening becomes clear. The story begins with a man who most people wouldn't notice twice. He's a thief, but not the kind people imagine when they think of criminals. He isn't rich. He isn't powerful. He doesn't have connections or protection. He steals because he has to, because some days stealing is the only way he eats. He lives day to day, moving through the city like a shadow, taking small things, things people won't immediately miss, wallets left unattended, loose cash, phones, food, whatever keeps him going another night. People like him learn how to observe. He watches how people walk, how they carry themselves, who is distracted and who is alert. He knows parks well, especially during busy hours. People relax there. They sit on benches, talk, argue, get lost in their thoughts. They forget themselves, forget their surroundings, forget their belongings. That's where he notices something strange. He sees a person sitting alone, looking around nervously. The person takes something small and slips it into their hat. Not casually, but carefully, like it matters, like they don't want anyone to see. The thief notices this because it's unusual. Most people hide things in bags or pockets, not hats. The person looks tense, distracted, like they're waiting for someone or worried about being watched. Eventually, the person stands up and leaves. They forget the hat on the bench. At first, the thief thinks it's a mistake. Just another bit of bad luck he can take advantage of. He waits a little, watching to see if the person comes back. They don't. The park keeps moving around him, people passing, laughing, talking, completely unaware that anything important has just been left behind. He takes the hat. He expects money, drugs, jewelry, something he can sell quickly, something that will make his life a little easier, even if just for a short while. He moves to a quiet place and looks inside. What he finds makes no sense. There's no money, no valuables, just a small handbook, old, worn. The kind of thing no one would bother stealing on purpose. At first, he's annoyed. He thinks he's wasted his time. He flips through it anyway, more out of boredom than interest. Inside, there's a list of names. Some are crossed out. Some are circled. Some have notes beside them, dates, places, short comments that don't mean anything to him at first. Then his eyes stop on one name. It's the name of a girl who disappeared the year before. Everyone in the country knows her name. Her face was on the news for weeks. Posters, social media, candlelight vigils. She vanished without explanation. No body, no clear suspect, just rumors. Some people thought she ran away, others thought she was killed. Over time, the story faded from daily news, but it never really left people's minds. Seeing her name written there makes his stomach tighten. This isn't random. He suddenly understands that this handbook isn't worthless at all. It's dangerous. Whatever it is, it wasn't meant to be found by someone like him. It was meant for someone else, someone trusted, someone involved. He thinks about taking it to the police. The thought barely lasts a few seconds. In his world, going to the police rarely ends well. He's been arrested before, beaten before, ignored before. He doesn't trust them, and more importantly, he doesn't believe they would protect him. Turning this in wouldn't make him a hero. It would make him a target. So he does what he always does. He holds on to it and watches. He starts asking quiet questions, careful ones. He doesn't show the book to anyone. He doesn't mention the girl's name out loud. He just listens. He hangs around places where information moves fast. Bars, corners, back rooms, people who deal in drugs, favors, secrets. Slowly, a picture begins to form. The girl wasn't just a random victim. She had gotten involved with the wrong people. A drug smuggling operation that moved things through the city and beyond it. People who didn't tolerate mistakes. People who didn't forgive loose ends. The handbook, he realizes, is connected to that operation. It's a record of people involved, of people who owed money, of people who became problems, including her. Eventually, the thief figures out who the handbook belongs to. The man behind it all isn't some street-level dealer. He's careful, organized, quiet. He runs the operation like a business. He keeps his hands clean whenever possible. Others do the dirty work. He doesn't panic easily. He plans far ahead, and he's dangerous. The thief also learns something else. The hat wasn't lost by accident. It was left there on purpose, meant to be picked up by someone specific, someone trusted within the organization. The thief wasn't supposed to find it. His theft wasn't just stealing an object. It disrupted a chain of communication. Now people are looking for that hat, and whoever took it. At first, the thief thinks about disappearing, leaving the city, dropping the handbook somewhere anonymous. But leaving costs money, and anonymity is hard when you have nothing. He realizes that running without resources is just another way to get caught or killed. Instead, he makes a reckless decision. He tries to get close to the organization. He knows the streets. People know him. He has a reputation as someone who can get things, who can move unnoticed. That becomes his entry point. He approaches low-level members offering help. Small jobs, deliveries, watching places, running messages. They test him. He passes. He lies well. He keeps his mouth shut. He never mentions the handbook. He keeps it hidden, always close, always weighing on his mind. The closer he gets to the operation, the more he realizes how deep it goes, how many people are involved, how much money moves through it, how many lives it has already destroyed. That's when he finds out the worst part. The police are being bribed. Not all of them, but enough that certain raids never happen, enough that certain people are never arrested, enough that disappearances don't get investigated too deeply. The system that is supposed to stop this operation is quietly helping it continue. That knowledge crushes whatever hope he still had. There is no easy way out. If he goes to the police, there's a good chance the information will go straight back to the people he's trying to escape. If he tries to leave the organization, he becomes a liability. If he stays, he becomes complicit. Years pass like this. Years of tension, of fear, of pretending. He lives two lives. On the surface, he's just another street guy trying to survive. Inside, he's constantly calculating, watching for signs that they suspect him, listening for rumors about the hat, about the handbook, about loose ends. He learns what happened to the girl. Not all the details, but enough. She tried to leave. She knew too much. She wanted out. Maybe thought she could walk away. The organization couldn't allow that. People like her don't just disappear by chance. They are made to disappear. Knowing this eats at him. He thinks about the list of names often. About how many of them might be dead. How many are still alive but trapped, like he is. The handbook becomes a symbol of everything he wants to escape and everything he can't let go of. There are moments where he almost gets out. Opportunities that look promising. A contact who might help him leave the city. A chance to sell information. Each time, something goes wrong. Someone disappears. Someone gets arrested. Someone gets killed. Every failed attempt tightens the net around him. The organization never forgets. Neither does the thief. He becomes older, harder, more cautious. The streets change. New people come in. Old ones vanish. Through it all, he survives. Not because he's brave, but because he's careful. Because he understands that survival doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like silence, like waiting, like living with guilt. The handbook stays hidden the entire time. It's his leverage and his curse. If he gives it up, he loses the only thing that might save him someday. If he keeps it, he carries proof of crimes that could get him killed if discovered. Every day he lives with that tension, with the knowledge that his life could end instantly if the wrong person finds out what he has. What makes the story linger is that it doesn't end cleanly. There's no dramatic escape, no sudden justice, no clear victory. The thief eventually fades out of the public eye. Some say he got out. Some say he didn't. Some say he's still alive, somewhere else, living quietly under a different name. Others say he died, like so many others connected to that world, unnoticed and unremembered. What remains is the lesson people take from the story, that survival can push ordinary people into extraordinary danger, that sometimes doing the right thing isn't clear when the systems meant to protect you are corrupt, that being poor, invisible, and desperate can put you closer to evil than you ever intended to be. It also reminds people that crimes don't always begin with violence. Sometimes they begin with a small mistake, a forgotten hat, a moment of carelessness, a thief expecting money and finding truth instead. And once you've touched that truth, once you've seen what's behind the surface, there may be no safe way to put it back. That's why the story stays alive. Not because it's flashy or dramatic, but because it feels possible. Because it shows how easily lives can become tangled in things they never chose. Because it shows how danger doesn't always come roaring in. Sometimes it sits quietly on a park bench, waiting for the wrong person to pick it up. My husband and I live in the countryside, in a large, single-family house, surrounded by fields and trees. It's quiet out here, in a way that can feel peaceful during the day and unsettling at night. We share the house with our dog, Baloo, a big, solid presence who normally makes me feel safe no matter what. He's calm, alert, and deeply protective. Knowing he's around usually keeps my nerves in check. A few months ago, my husband had to go away for the weekend. It wasn't unusual, but I still felt a little uneasy about being alone in the house overnight. The place is big, and when you're by yourself, every sound carries farther. Still, I told myself I was being silly. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and went to bed with Baloo sleeping nearby. His steady breathing was comforting, and eventually I drifted off. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I woke up. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was the kind of waking where you're half asleep and not entirely sure why your eyes are open. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound. Soft at first, almost subtle enough to dismiss. Sounded like something scraping or clawing lightly, the way an animal might scratch at wood or stone. I'm a very light sleeper. Even small noises wake me, so my first instinct was to rationalize it. We live in the countryside, after all. Martins, mice, and other animals sometimes get close to the house. I assumed something was scratching outside, maybe near a window. Still groggy, I got out of bed and went to close the window just in case. When I reached it, I realized it was already shut. That was the first moment I felt a flicker of real unease. I stood there, listening more carefully. The sound came again, a little louder this time. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the house. My heart started beating faster. I tried to stay calm and immediately thought of Baloo. Maybe he was scratching at the bedroom door, wanting to come in. That would make sense. I opened the door to the living room, expecting to see him right there. Instead, Baloo was lying in his bed across the room, wide awake. His ears were pricked forward, his body tense, his eyes locked on me. He wasn't scratching. He wasn't moving. He looked alert in a way that instantly told me something was wrong. By then, I was fully awake. The scratching sound continued, louder now, more deliberate. I turned on the living room light, my hand shaking slightly. The sound didn't come from the floor or the ceiling. It came from the wall itself. I froze. It felt like my breath caught somewhere in my chest, refusing to move. I stood there listening, trying to understand what I was hearing, trying to force my mind to come up with a reasonable explanation. Pipes, old wiring, something structural, anything. Before I could make sense of it, Baloo suddenly jumped up. He growled, low and deep, a sound I had rarely heard from him. He ran straight to the wall and started scratching at it, his claws scraping hard against the surface. That was when fear really took hold. Baloo wasn't confused or playful. He was reacting to something. My thoughts raced. I remembered my sister, who lives next door with her family. She had told me more than once that I could call her any time if something happened, no matter the hour. Since it was the weekend, I figured she might still be awake or at least reachable. I decided to grab my phone. I went back into the bedroom, moving quickly but quietly, my pulse pounding in my ears. The scratching continued behind me. As I picked up my phone and unlocked it, my hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. Before I could dial, Baloo started barking. Not his usual warning bark. This was loud, frantic, aggressive. The kind of barking that comes from pure alarm. I ran back into the living room and saw him at the far end, staring into the dark hallway that led deeper into the house. I shouted his name, telling him to stop, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't even look at me. Then, without warning, he bolted straight into the darkness of the hallway. For a split second, everything went silent. And then there was a loud crash. It came from the direction of the stairs, a heavy, unmistakable sound, like something large hitting hard. In that moment, any attempt at rational thinking vanished. I was absolutely convinced that someone had broken into the house. My heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst. I screamed for Baloo, my voice shaking with panic. A second later, he came running back toward me, whining loudly, his tail tucked, his whole body trembling. I slammed the bedroom door shut behind us and locked it. My hands were shaking as I dialed emergency services. I could barely get the words out. I told the dispatcher that I thought there was an intruder in my house, that my dog had chased something, and there had been a crash. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, thin and strained. The house went completely silent. The scratching stopped. The hallway was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Just the sound of Baloo whimpering softly beside me. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, crouched on the bed, every muscle tense. Baloo pressed himself against me, still shaking. I tried to calm him, running my hand along his back in slow, steady motions. That's when I felt it. My hand came away warm and wet. I looked down and saw blood. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Then I noticed the dark stain spreading through his fur. I moved my hand again and saw a large, open wound on his side. Blood was soaking into his coat, dripping onto the floor. I felt a wave of shock wash over me, so strong it made me dizzy. I didn't want to leave the bedroom, not for a second, but I had to do something. I grabbed every piece of clothing I could reach and pressed them against the wound, applying as much pressure as I could. My hands were slippery with blood. Baloo whimpered but stayed still, trusting me completely. Time stretched in a strange way. Every second felt endless. I kept listening for sounds outside the door, expecting footsteps, another crash, something, anything. But there was nothing. Eventually, the police arrived. Hearing their voices outside the door was the most relief I've ever felt. They searched the house thoroughly, room by room, top to bottom. Every door and window was checked. Every lock was intact. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing broken, nothing disturbed. According to the officers, it was impossible for anyone to have entered or exited the house. Baloo was rushed to an emergency animal clinic while the police finished their search. I couldn't bring myself to stay in the house after that. Once everything was done, I went to my sister's place and spent the rest of the night there, sitting on her couch, replaying everything over and over in my head. Baloo survived. The vet stitched up his wound, and thankfully, there were no lasting complications. Today, he's doing great, back to his normal self, as loving and protective as ever. When I asked the vet what could have caused such an injury, he told me it looked like it had been caused by an external force, something powerful. He said it resembled the kind of slash you'd expect from a bear's claws. There are no bears anywhere near our home. To this day, there is no explanation for what happened that night. The police found nothing. The house showed no signs of intrusion. The sounds came from inside the walls. My dog was injured by something strong enough to tear him open, yet nothing was there when help arrived. Every time I think about it, a cold shiver runs down my spine. I still live in that house. I still lock the doors every night. And I still trust Baloo more than anything. But sometimes, when the house is quiet, and it's just me and the dark outside, I remember the scratching, the crash, and the blood on my hands. And I know there are some nights you never really leave behind, no matter how much time passes. This is one of those stories that feels unreal no matter how many times you hear it, because of how far it goes and how casually it begins. It didn't happen in some distant place or in a time people barely remember. It happened in Georgia, not that long ago, maybe 10 years back. Long enough that people try to convince themselves it's old news, but recent enough that the details still feel sharp and close to the surface. It started with two friends. They'd known each other for years. Best friends, the kind who did everything together, who trusted each other without thinking twice. The kind of friendship where you don't question getting into a car together, even when drinking is involved, because you've done it before, and nothing bad has happened yet. That's how people talk themselves into dangerous situations, not through recklessness alone, but through familiarity and false confidence. They had been drinking heavily that night. Not a few beers, not something mild, but drunk enough that judgment was already gone. The driver was wasted. His best friend, riding shotgun, was just as bad. Loud, sloppy, hanging halfway out the passenger side window, either getting sick or just acting wild in that careless, chaotic way drunk people sometimes do when they think they're invincible. They were driving fast, too fast. At some point, they crossed a suspension bridge, the kind with cables running alongside it, tall and rigid, unforgiving. The bridge wasn't dangerous on its own. Thousands of people crossed it safely every day. But nothing is safe when alcohol, speed, and stupidity collide. The driver was swerving, not violently at first, just enough to show he wasn't in control. Small corrections too late. Overcompensating. Letting the car drift before yanking it back. The road blurred. The lights stretched. Everything that should have told him to slow down or stop had already been muted by alcohol. One of those swerves went too far. The car veered close to the side of the bridge just for a second, just enough. The passenger was still leaning out of the window. There was no time to react. No moment to understand what was happening. The bridge cables didn't move. They didn't bend. They didn't give. The impact was instant. His best friend was killed immediately. There's no clean way to explain what happened without it sounding horrific, because it was. In one violent moment, the passenger was decapitated by the structure of the bridge. It wasn't a slow accident. It wasn't survivable. It was final, brutal, and irreversible. And yet somehow the story doesn't end there. The driver didn't stop. That's the part people struggle to wrap their heads around. Not the accident itself, as awful as it was, but what came after. Instead of slamming on the brakes, instead of pulling over, instead of screaming or calling for help, the driver kept going. Whether it was shock, alcohol, denial, or some combination of all three, no one can say for sure. But he drove all the way home. He parked the car. His best friend's body was still in the passenger seat. Blood covered the side of the vehicle, streaked along the door and frame, visible even in low light. The driver got out, went inside his house, and passed out. Just like that. No call to the police, no attempt to check on his friend, no realization, or at least no action, that showed he understood the gravity of what had happened. The night ended there. The world went quiet. Morning came. It was Sunday. A mother and her child were walking to church. Just a normal morning routine. The kind of peaceful, unremarkable moment people don't even remember most days. They were walking down the street when they noticed a car parked nearby that looked wrong. The side of it was covered in blood. That alone was enough to make anyone stop, enough to send a chill through your body. As they got closer, they saw inside the car. They found the passenger, headless, still sitting in. The seat. The shock of that discovery is hard to imagine. A child seeing something like that. A mother realizing she had just stumbled upon the aftermath of something unspeakable. The contrast between a quiet Sunday morning And the horror sitting in that car must have felt unreal, like stepping into a nightmare without warning. Police were called immediately. The scene turned chaotic. Officers arrived. The street was blocked off. Neighbors came out of their homes confused, frightened, trying to understand what had happened. Word spread quickly, because something like that doesn't stay quiet for long. It becomes a story people whisper about, then talk about openly, then try to forget, but never quite can. The driver was arrested. There was no mystery about what had happened. Evidence was everywhere. Witnesses had seen the car earlier. The bridge was examined. Toxicology reports confirmed what everyone already knew. He had been driving drunk, severely drunk. His actions directly caused his best friend's death. The legal consequences followed. Charges were filed, court dates set, sentencing eventually handed down. On paper, the system did what it was supposed to do, but paper doesn't carry the weight of what was lost. A life ended in the most violent, senseless way imaginable. A family lost a son. Friends lost someone they had grown up with. And a child, walking to church on a Sunday morning, was exposed to an image that will likely stay with them for the rest of their life. The driver didn't just kill his friend. He destroyed multiple lives in one night. What makes this story so disturbing isn't just the accident itself, but the layers of failure surrounding it. The decision to drink, the decision to drive, the decision to speed, the decision to keep swerving. And then, the most chilling decision of all, to go home and sleep instead of stopping. Some people argue that he must not have realized what happened. That alcohol dulled his awareness so much that he didn't understand the severity of the crash. Others argue that he knew, at least on some level, and chose denial over responsibility. The truth may be somewhere in between. Alcohol doesn't erase reality, but it can distort it. Shock can numb you. Fear can make you avoid the truth. But none of that changes the outcome. His best friend was dead, and he was the reason. There's something uniquely horrifying about the fact that the body remained in the passenger seat all night, that the driver slept a few feet away from the aftermath of what he'd done. That morning came not with remorse or realization, but with discovery by strangers. It forces you to confront how thin the line is between normalcy and catastrophe. Two friends having a night out, a bridge they'd crossed before, a moment of swerving, and suddenly a death so violent it defies comprehension. It also highlights how alcohol doesn't just impair judgment. It strips away the instincts that make us human. The instinct to stop, to help, to panic, to care. Whether through shock or intoxication, the driver's response was not what anyone would expect from someone who had just lost their best friend. That disconnect is terrifying. The story stayed in the public consciousness for a long time. People talked about it as a cautionary tale. Parents used it as an example when warning their kids about drunk driving. Friends brought it up when someone suggested driving after drinking. It became one of those stories that's always just under the surface, ready to be mentioned when someone needs reminding of how bad things can get. But for the people directly affected, it wasn't a story. It was their reality. The family of the passenger had to bury their loved one without closure, without the comfort of believing it was a freak accident beyond human control. They had to live with the knowledge that his death was preventable, that it came from choices made by someone he trusted completely. The driver had to live with what he did. Prison time, public shame, guilt, whatever combination of punishment and regret followed him. None of it could undo that night. None of it could bring his friend back. None of it could erase the image of what he left behind. And then there's the child who found the car. People often forget about witnesses in stories like this. Not the ones involved, but the ones who accidentally stumble into the aftermath. That child went to church that day carrying an image no child should ever see. That's a secondary trauma that doesn't show up in police reports or court documents, but it's real all the same. What makes this story so haunting is how preventable it was. Not through some grand intervention, but through simple choices, calling a cab, giving the keys to someone else, waiting. Not leaning out of a window, slowing down. Any one of those could have changed the outcome. Instead, every wrong choice stacked on top of the last, building toward a moment that couldn't be taken back. It's not a ghost story. It's not a mystery. It's not even complicated. It's a brutal reminder of what happens when alcohol, speed, and recklessness collide, and of how the consequences don't stop with the moment of impact. They ripple outward, touching families, strangers, entire communities. Even years later, people still talk about it. Not because it's sensational, but because it's so deeply unsettling. Because it shows how easily someone can cross from being a friend, a companion, a trusted person, into being the cause of unimaginable loss. And because it reminds everyone who hears it that sometimes the worst stories don't come from monsters or evil intentions. They come from ordinary people making terrible decisions and not stopping when they still had the chance. That's what makes it stick. That's what makes it hard to forget. And that's why, even now, people still lower their voices when they talk about that night on the bridge in Georgia, and the Sunday morning when a mother and child discovered the truth sitting silently in a parked car. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.